Richard, thanks for joining us. So, what is emotion recognition?
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. Emotional recognition is actually the sum of several processes that human beings perform on a daily basis. We collect data based on people in terms of their facial expressions, in terms of their body language, also in terms of their tone of voice and inflection, and we process that. And that processing that occurs in our brain allows us to know when someone walks in a room whether they're in a good mood or perhaps in a foul mood, whatever the case may be. Those operations are really the core of what emotional recognition is. Sometimes we can tell based on someone's tone of voice on a telephone. Perhaps we can tell just when someone gives us a look by the expression on their face. But all of that is part of what human beings do on a regular basis to be able to understand the emotional experiences of others, interpret, these cues, and then be able to respond accordingly, dependent on the situation.
Okay. Are there IT systems in the market which perform emotional recognition?
Oh, absolutely. There's actually a vast array of them. Some of them focus predominantly on voice, where they look at the tone of voice, people's inflection, also what they call micro tremors in people's speech patterns. These are companies that produce machines such as the computer voice stress analysis test. The instrument used to perform those tests is supposed to be able to detect deception to some extent. Research actually indicates what it detects is anxiety, but the purpose is really irrelevant in terms of what the technology is capable of. So yeah, I mean that is in existence. It's being used widely and has been for several years. In addition, there are also programs out there that they're a blend of psychology and technology. And what they will do is they will take tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of pictures of people's faces around the world. And they use algorithms to look for similarities and differences. And what those algorithms allow these companies to do is to build a profile of sorts of different specific, I guess, attributes of people's faces in these pictures that they can look at to determine when someone might be having, a happy experience versus an unhappy experience. Uh, in addition, video technology is out there that allows people to, determine mood based on body language, the way that people move, their gait, perhaps, when they're walking, things like that. So there's a wealth of stuff, and it's coming from two totally different sides of the arena. On one side, you have proprietary stuff that's generated by companies looking to monetize it. And on the other side, you have a lot of the open source type software that's been created by people from a global populace who have a genuine interest and do this almost as a hobby. And they've created some phenomenal technologies.
Richard, you mentioned technology. We know that emotions depend also on the cultural background and on nationalities, for example. Is the current technology already able to cope with these differences?
Well, there's a nuance here. Emotion itself, emotional experience, is actually cross-cultural. It doesn't matter where you go in the world, whether you're talking with people who've grown up in industrialized areas, or if you're speaking with, someone from, a tribe in the Amazon rainforest that's never met people from the outside world until today, happy is still going to be happy. Unhappy or sad is still going to be unhappy or sad. The emotional experience itself is universal. However, the cultural impact you're talking about is the way we outwardly express our emotions. Now, the interesting thing is when you look at someone's facial expression, we as human beings, oftentimes we don't want to outwardly emote clearly what we're experiencing. For example, if someone's having an awful day at home, when they go into work, they don't want to outwardly express that. They don't want everyone in the office to know. So we do a lot to deceive people. We put on a mask, if you will. But there is software that exists that can detect what are called micro expressions. These are things that they're involuntary. Some people believe you can train yourself not to have them, not to express them. But the reality is, without a consistent focus and effort specifically to avoid those, they are there. It's why we get a feeling sometimes if you're around someone you know well, all of a sudden you know something's off with them. They're acting normal, but you just know something's off. Because on a subconscious level, you're picking up on things like micro expressions or other factors that are not necessarily perceptible on a conscious level. And there is software that can detect that. In fact, there's software that can train people to detect that. So you can actually, use interactive web-based, software platforms to learn how to be able to detect micro expressions in other people. And much of that software is quite amazing.
Richard, can emotional recognition be used for good purposes? Can you give us some examples?
Absolutely. There are a lot of ways that this type of, technology-based emotional recognition can be used for very positive things. Uh, Thwarting terror attacks is one of them. These things tend to happen in very crowded places. They tend to happen where there are large, public gatherings of groups of people. And the truth is, in those types of settings, you already have camera surveillance pretty much all over the place. What people don't often know is the true capability of the cameras that we have on our cellular devices, in our pockets. At events, people are holding their cameras up. They're recording things. The cameras that we have in our pocket, some of them are far more advanced than just being able to take a picture. Oftentimes, they can be used from maybe 100 yards away or even farther in some cases. They're so sensitive they can detect changes in blood pressure through circulation in a person's face. They can detect, pulse rate. Some cameras can be used for thermal imaging, which can detect body temperature changes. Some cameras are even being used, they can actually detect acidic content in people's perspiration, which, in case people are not aware, typically when someone is experiencing anxiety about doing something or about something going on in their life, the acidic content in perspiration tends to increase. So using these types of technologies, to give you an example, let's take something that was quite tragic that we in America experienced, the Boston Marathon bombing several years ago. It was a very crowded place. You had two terrorists who were, walking amongst the crowd, wearing backpacks. They had the same clothes on, and they tended to blend in, obviously. People didn't notice them. However, knowing what those two people were about to do, one would expect that physiologically they were having a response. You're going to have increased pulse rate, increased respiration, increased body temperature. These are things that can be detected through the use of cameras now. Also, for example, just the amount of weight they were carrying in those backpacks, you figure with the shrapnel and the metal and the devices themselves, it must have been a substantial amount of weight. So looking at those two people carrying backpacks versus every other person in the crowd carrying backpacks, technology can be used to detect differences in gait, differences in posture, and things of that nature. So use of technology on a day like that, which it happened to be between 40 and 50 degrees Fahrenheit, would most likely have demonstrated that these two people in the crowd, for some reason, had body temperatures that far exceeded the other people who were there as spectators. Their body language and their gait was probably quite substantially different than that of people who were carrying backpacks just, to keep water or snacks or perhaps a scarf or something like that in it. The early identification of those two people, could have been used to prevent a tremendous number of injuries and multiple deaths. So there is a tremendous opportunity to use technology like this for positive things.
Richard, many thanks for joining us today.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much for having me. It was a pleasure.